You're listening to a special World Update and World Have Your Say program with Aung San Suu Kyi, taking your calls. And we're also monitoring the situation in Cairo. Nabila Ramdani is here. Nabila, we saw in 2007 the people of Burma apparently rise up, led by the monks. That was repressed. In Cairo in the past, we've seen 100 people or so put themselves in great danger. The police would crack down. That will be the end of that. What happened to overcome this barrier of fear in Egypt?
Well, I think you're quite right to highlight the extreme bravery of the Egyptian people, who are effectively ready to put their lives at risk and also face potentially arrest and jail sentences. But what's very clear is that we are dealing with a population which is emboldened and determined to bring about political change, and that's in spite of having to deal with a very powerful and indeed very sinister security apparatus.
And so when Tan is here from the Burmese service, there's no doubting the bravery of those who went out on the streets in 2007. Why could they not keep the momentum up then?
One thing is the difference, what I see with Egypt and Burma situation at that time was that my colleague just mentioned about the bravery of the Egyptian people and who are braving the sinister, the apparatus of the military and the government. But the difference was the Burmese military was more brutal. Even they dared to crack down or shoot at the monk, which is the most revered class, almost untouchable in Burma. So the main difference is the ruthlessness of the government.
Whereas we've heard that the army in Egypt has said it will not attack Egypt's people. Thanks for the moment, Sowen Tan and Nabila Ramdani. Reporting from Tahrir Square, we're here in our studio is Nabila Ramdani, the writer. Nabila, we heard there from Jim that there are some who will, they hope, be part of the change, who will allow Hosni Mubarak to stay as a shell, as Jim put it. What about the crowds, though? Do you think they will accept that?
No, it's very clear that what's been called the March of Millions is a clear test for the Mubarak regime. Remember, the country is also crippled by a general strike, and the march has been built up as a pivotal march. And it seems that both the opposition but also ordinary citizens have it's very much a one-aim march to try to force Mubarak to step down. And in that sense, it seems a very reasonable demand. But what sums up the desperation of the regime and the hopelessness of Mubarak regime is the way he decided to send F-16 warplanes, for example, to over Egypt's skies, hoping that the sight of the planes will scare people away and send them back home. But of course, this isn't working.
So what comes next, do you imagine? Because the army says it won't fire on the people. There are more and more people coming, and yet the trains are blocked, the internet's down, they're stopping journalists at the airport, and so on. There's quite clearly a division. Can you call it chaos yet at the level of the ruling party?
Absolutely. And I think that the fact that the Egyptian army has pledged not to use force, which in my opinion is rather odd thing to do for any army, it's perhaps the best indication that the regime really is facing the end. If Mubarak can no longer count on the army to impose law and order on his behalf, then he hasn't got much chance of surviving.
Well, the people are shouting loud enough, saying go. He's not going. Who in the end will have to whisper in his ear?
There's immense pressure put on him at the moment, both by, of course, the demonstrators, the opposition groups in Egypt, of which there are many, and also increasingly Western powers who have been changing their tone as the demonstrations went on and are now clearly asking for an orderly transition, whatever that means.
Nabila, thanks for the moment. Stay with us if you can. Nabila Ramdani, a writer on Arab world and Islamic affairs. Business Monitor International. In our studio, the writer on Arab and Islamic affairs, Nabila Ramdani. Nabila, how would you hope, if the political changes come as the people on the streets want, how would you hope the economy then responds?
I think it is likely to pick up if there is going to be a political change, And I quite agree with the analysis of a former speaker, of a previous speaker. Of course, the images of chaos coming out of Egypt at the moment are likely to damage Egypt's standing in the world and have a devastating effect on tourism. But I think that it's going to happen on a very short term. Let's be honest, Egypt has seen far worse. It was struck by terrorist attacks, for example, not too long ago, and the economy has always been able to recover after that, especially the tourist industry. So what's happening at the moment, we have people around the world rather sympathizing with the demands and the cause of the Egyptians, and everybody wants to see the pyramids at some point in their lives. So I'm quite optimistic on the long term about the economy.
So it may be a difficult few months for the tourist industry. There are other sources of income. Egypt has gas, for example, doesn't it? So there are ways of earning a living, and that might go on. But what about politically? Because the fear is that support from the United States would dry up if there were to be a radical change in the way Egypt is ruled.
Of course, I mean, it's very clear that the U.S. administration is very pragmatic about its approach to Egypt. There are no principles there. They're not clearly saying that a dictator and effectively a dictatorship should, come to an end. They're more interested about the future of the region and Egypt's future relations with Egypt, but also with the West in general and Washington in particular. So we've heard a very wishy-washy statement coming from Washington and also from the EU and Britain. And this is going to impact on the future of Egypt.
Of course, you monitor the whole region. Where else are they watching very closely? The African Union's been meeting in Addis Ababa. A lot of nervousness amongst some of the so-called big men of Africa there.
Absolutely, and I was, dare I say, Yemen is another country to watch very closely. Remember, it's part and parcel of Americans' policy, the so-called war on terror, and of course Egypt, but also regimes like Tunisia, were very close allies to Washington. And were determined to quell any rise of Islamist parties.
All eyes will be on Tahrir Square and the numbers as they build, and they are still getting into the square, even though the transport's been a problem for many of the people who want to go there. What would be the signs you would be looking for over the next 24 hours to show that change is permanent and perhaps the man at the top has finally got the signal and will go?
Well, the signs that we've been seeing recently are not very encouraging. Mubarak brought in two men with military credentials, Prime Minister and the Vice President, and yesterday he called in another retired general as Minister of the Interior. And it's hugely symbolic for the Egyptians, because it means that what Mubarak firmly believes in is more crackdown and more repression, and he's not giving any signal that he's on his way out.
Nabila, thanks very much indeed for being with us on this special World Update and World Have Your Say programme. Nabila Ramdani, a writer on Arab and Islamic affairs.